Isn't it fascinating how we don't seem to share one culture today? Even though people are speaking about we living in postmodern ages, in pluralist ages, where supposedly all forms of differences are cherished and integrated, I don't see that integration happening in our everyday lives. Quite the opposite, actually. What I see happening is us avoiding each other and avoiding cultures that differ significantly from your own. I experienced this firsthand by first having been socialized into liberal academic thinking, and then I had to actually find out firsthand how all the things that I learned to be valuable within this one specific space were absolutely useless within another space, and within another space still in society. I'm still talking about something that's in society. So after I studied philosophy, I went a few years to work as a truck driver, and I figured all the things that I had learned during my academic upbringing were actually hindrances. They were not really helpful when you wanted to survive in this very different environment. So, for example, if you wanted to um, to actually secure the load on a truck properly, if you wanted to obey the physical laws that demand a certain number of belts that you have to use per row, you would have lost, I think, something like 2 hours a day just securing the load. So the reality of it was that most truckers were and still are today on the road with insufficiently secured loads, at least in Europe. So the reality of it is, instead of using two belts per row and special floor mats, which make the shifting of the load almost impossible, most truckers use at best one belt per row and don't usually have the time to use these floor mats. That's something that was unthinkable in my academic circles. Running around, driving around with a truck with an insecure load, this is something that is amoral, right? You are endangering other people. Yet it's the reality of it. If you want to be a decent truck driver, you have to make compromises and you have to follow entirely different norms from the norms that were relevant and working upon you, right? Like pushing from top down onto you in the academic sphere. For example, self questioning or coming up with solid defenses of positions, all of that stuff, or constantly taking in new input from new perspectives, or preparing yourself how you would react in different situations and what points you would make. All of that stuff was actually not only irrelevant, well, it would actually hinder you from doing a job well as a truck driver. As a truck driver, you actually have to kind of follow a hierarchical structure. Your job is not to be there and question the hierarchical structure and question the meaning of it all and the meaning of capitalism. But you have an entirely different role, and all of the things that you learn in academia actually make you feel bad, make you feel bad about yourself, because you feel like you are basically submitting to a system that is unfair. You are basically immoral by polluting the environment, by driving usually diesel trucks, and by doing the bidding of people who are, at the end of the day, just exploiting you. So this is the general picture that I think you get in the more academic spaces of what reality is composed of. So in a way, you don't have much of a choice. You either have to think differently about reality, and you have to find other values, and you have to find other things that become relevant to you and become meaningful norms to you, or you won't be able to survive in this environment. But to me, what's fascinating is that despite our feeling that we live in one society, at the end of the day, we see such distinctions between our cultures, between how we perceive reality, only when we actually get to talk to each other and spend really some time with each other. I only got to see this once I had to actually do the job. Once I really had to spend significant time and see, well, how will you do with the framework that you have so far built up in this new environment? And it was a nightmare. It was dragging me down in all possible regards. And I believe this is the reality for what happens when people meet each other in person and come from these different social spaces. And despite being told that we're all one society, on one world society, The reality is that when people with these different backgrounds meet each other on the street, they start pulling each other down significantly, particularly if they're forced to spend a certain amount of time together. They actually figure out that not only they are different, and it's not just minor differences, but they are to such a degree different that what makes one person survive in one context and what is absolutely necessary as a frame of perceiving the world is a frame that is destructive to the next neighbor next door, right? This is the reality of it. And we are not really noticing this because our present day society is not really forcing us to spend time together and to actually think together and get together in meaningful ways. Most of our encounters are meaningless. They are not about our values. They're not concerning anything that's really deeply relevant to us. They are very superficial. You can have a drink with everybody. That's not a challenge. That's not particularly different. Just as you can have a nice small talk with everybody. But when it comes to really challenging situations, and when it comes to really starting to share one world with another world, you see that there are boundaries which are very, very difficult to transgress once you are coming from a specific social context. And you then start perceiving the other side as threatening, as something that is to be erased out of view, and something that is to be re-educated. And this is happening in all kinds of directions. So creating spaces, social spaces where people can actually meet and exchange their own background assumptions and their own worldviews without feeling threatened by that very exchange, and doing this exchange also in a meaningful way, not just by mentioning the same superficial and meaningless cliches, but actually sharing about your experience without being judged from the other side. This is something that I basically don't see happening at all. What are the spaces where this would happen? When people go to watch a movie, they're usually already sharing a world space, and from that world space they usually choose to watch the movie. When people meet at a bar, they also usually don't really get into these issues to such a degree that they could really feel what reality is for the other person. Social spaces on new media are the worst. There you have bubbles, and the attempt to basically paint the other side as basically insane and unpredictable and incomprehensible. So that's not the place either. So where would you go? What are the places, what are the spaces where you would go to actually meet someone and understand the background and the reality they're coming from? I think the only way I see is just by doing what other people are doing. And this cuts, of course, in both ways. I mean, if I imagine my truck driver colleagues back in the day, they thought of students as mostly lazy and irresponsible people. They did not see anything that was related to hard work, and university is obviously hard work. Of course, you have to challenge yourself constantly, and of course, mental activity is not just is not just fun and doing nothing. Of course, it's challenging, but most of the works that are the result of such an endeavor are not visible. They are not something you can touch, not something you can see, not something you can buy in the store. So since they're not visible, of course, then the image is easily created that students are basically doing nothing and living on the expenses of their parents, which is, of course, not really the case. So that's the way I think it usually works, by simply doing the things that the other side does, by simply literally opening the doors and entering those spaces firsthand. But apart from this immediate action, which is oftentimes connected to work, so you have to find a specific position where you can meet those people. Apart from that, I think it's not that easy to actually shift spaces and shift world spaces and start developing a feel for what it's like to be the other person. Well, I imagine it would have been much, much easier 100 years ago, where no matter how much the differences were, I think it was much more easy to imagine what it's like to be, I don't know, a horsemith, or what's the word, or what it's like to be a carpenter. It was much more easy for everybody within society, I believe, to imagine what everybody else is and where everybody else is coming from. Well, nowadays I have the feeling someone who is a professional musician will have a very difficult time imagining what it's like to be a truck driver, just as it cuts the other way around. Or someone who's working in physics will also have a very difficult time of seeing many other dimensions of what it's like to be a human being present in present day society. And as long as this is difficult, it is going to be ever more difficult to hold society together, because we basically don't understand each other. And we develop a sense for, being almost enemies to each other, simply because the language that the other sides are using and the norms that the other sides are using are so incomprehensible to us. And particularly if we look at social spaces, the language has reached degrees of narrative warfare long ago. So we're not just ridiculing the other side, but we're really treating the other side as literally evil. And evil is the only thing that deserves to be destroyed without remorse. This is the only concept that we have, as far as I see, where the destruction of the phenomenon doesn't even need to concern us. You don't even have to feel bad about it, but the opposite. You can sleep well and even feel proud about yourself of having destroyed evil. That's the problem of buying into the concept of evil. Once you have the notion of evil, you have introduced a notion of something that is unconditionally worthy of destruction. And that's fun times.